Hi, it's Alex. Today I want to look at 1 Peter 5, 6 through 9 with a particular focus on the logical relationship of action and manner. You may remember from your cheat sheet that action and manner is defined this way: the statement of an action followed by a more precise statement that indicates the way or the manner in which this action is carried out. So the key words you're looking for are in that or by. And the example I used in an earlier video was your brother Esau comforts himself by planning to kill you. So it's the manner in which he's comforting himself. Now, one thing you'll notice is that on your cheat sheet, there's a note that points us toward an adverbial participle of means or manner, because we're dealing with verbs here in action and manner. And in this particular relationship, we have a particular focus on the adverbial participle of means or manner. So the adverbial participle is simply a verb which modifies another verb, and it's acting as an adverb, which is funny because even in this definition we have an example of this right here in the word acting, because the main verb here is modifies, a verb which modifies another verb, and the way it modifies, the manner, is by acting, or in that it acts as an adverb. So just a couple of hints here. Couple of hints when you're looking for an adverbial participle is usually in English these words end in ing. So usually you can look for a word, which is what we have here, acting, ends in ing. So that's one thing that you can look at. It's not always true, but generally it's a good rule of thumb. Another hint is that this comes after the main verb in English, after the main verb. So the example that we have here, even in the definition, modifies would be the main verb, and acting is the adverbial participle. It's acting as an adverb, modifying this main verb, which of course happens to be the word modify. All right, so let me give you some examples of this from 1 Peter 5, 6 through 9. Let me read it. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting, now there's a word, an ing word, that we'll want to keep our eyes peeled. Not all ing words are adverbial participles, but we can just note here to come back and ask the question, does this modify another verb or does it stand on its own? Casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. So let me show you how I broke this down into its verbal assertions, into its propositions, and then we can take a look at arcing it together and consider these action and manner relationships particularly. So this is how I broke it down. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God. Let me stretch this out so you can see the whole thing. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God. This therefore is pointing us to what came before this in 1 Peter 5. So that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him. And this is that first example. Casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion. I could have, and we have an ing word here, but this is actually adjectival, not adverbial, because it's modifying lion, and it really isn't a prepositional phrase, so I'm not going to set that off as its own verbal assertion or proposition. I'm going to keep that with this as one proposition. Next proposition, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. So that's how I broke it down into its various propositions. And let me show you how I would arc this then before we look at these adverbial participles of means or manner. The first thing I see as I go through this passage is right here, this action and purpose relationship set off by these key words, so that. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. So right here we have a relationship of action and purpose. Take this action because of this purpose that God has. Humble yourselves under God's mighty hand so that at the proper time he may exalt you. And then that brings us to this word that we noted, casting. And we can see how there's implied right here by casting, or in that you are casting. So we can see that this is a verb on its own, makes its own verbal assertion, casting all your anxieties on him. But it's actually modifying this right here, humble yourselves. How are we directed to humble ourselves? There's a lot of things that spring to mind, right? But the specific one that Peter has in mind is this, casting your anxieties on him. So right here we have an action that we're exhorted to and the manner in which he is exhorting us to carry out this action. So I'm going to label this as action and manner. Draw my arc over this. And then that brings us to the last proposition in this sentence, because he cares for you. And this is begun with the word because. That's our key word right here, which points us to the relationship of ground. So I'm going to label that as a ground. Draw my arc over that. And then we have verse 8 here, which there's probably a few different ways that I could arc this, but as I thought about it, as I read this, I think this is just a simple series. You could do something more complicated, but when I'm in doubt, I tend to go with the simple coordinate relationship of series, of two exhortations that he's giving us. Be sober, be watchful in this sentence, connected by this semicolon right here. So I'm just going to call that a simple series. And then that brings me down here to the next sentence. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Seeking someone to devour. So again, we have this example, seeking someone to devour, which seems to modify. I mean, we think of this in terms of modifying the roaring lion, but really it's an adverbial participle, and it's modifying the way the devil prowls. It's modifying this verb. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around, and he has the metaphor like a roaring lion. But then this participle right here, seeking, modifies or describes the manner in which the devil prowls. So we have another relationship here of action and manner. And you can see that this fits our definition. It ends in ing. It comes at the end of this sentence after the devil prowls around, seeking someone to devour. And that's our adverbial participle that modifies the word prowls and points us to this action and manner relationship, which brings us then to verse 9. Resist him, firm in your faith. I kept this as one proposition because we don't have another verb, and so I just kept this together. Resist him, firm in your faith. You could say that the word, a word like standing maybe is implied right here. Resist him, standing firm in your faith, which interestingly would be another participle, right? Standing firm in your faith. But for the sake of my arcing here, I just kept this as one proposition because I see this adverbial participle that's given to me explicitly. It's not implied, but it's explicitly given to me in the text, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. So what is the manner in which we're exhorted to resist and stand firm? It's with knowing something, with knowing that this suffering is happening throughout the world. So we have another action and manner, and it's important that we recognize, especially as we're trying to get to the meaning of the text, that there's lots of things that maybe come to mind when we think about how to resist the devil, But we want to listen to Peter's specific manner that he's exhorting us to in how to resist this prowling devil who's seeking someone to devour. And it comes with this knowledge here. That's what Peter is pointing us to. And so we would be amiss if we pointed people to say, resist him, and here's 10 other ways to resist the devil. Well, we might miss the point of saying what Peter is actually saying, of saying what Scripture actually says here, by pointing them to this knowledge that's being pointed out. All right, so now I have these individual verses arced out. What's the relationship then as we go through these together? The first one I see is right here between 8ab and 8cd. I think there's a ground implied here with the word for. Be sober-minded, be watchful, for you have an adversary, the devil, who is seeking someone to devour. And that seems to mirror what happened up above here. Humble yourselves by casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. We had a ground relationship. I think that's happening here again with a second exhortation. Be sober, be watchful, for. So I'm going to label this as ground. Be sober, be watchful, for your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And then that brings us to this relationship right here. And I think what's implied here is an inference of, therefore, because this is true, because you have an adversary who's seeking someone to devour, resist him, knowing with this knowledge that Peter points us to. So I think that's the relationship that I'm going to arc out here. And then that brings me right here to this relationship. And I think what we have is, at the end of the day, as I've read over this, a simple series of a couple of exhortations. Humble yourselves, be sober, be watchful. Those are the main points that he's making. And then he's giving us purpose and the manner for that. He's giving us the reason and then the inference or the implication as what action that comes from this sobriety, this watchfulness. And so we really have be humble, be sober-minded, and watchful right here. So I'm going to label this as a series. Draw one arc over the top to complete my arcing of this passage. And I want you to just notice the adverbial participles. The first one, casting, right here, casting, comes as the description of how to humble ourselves. How do we humble ourselves? By casting all our anxieties on him. And if we wanted to dig into this further, we could look up at the verses above that in which Peter is exhorting all of us in the church to submit ourselves, for young men particularly, to be in submission, to humble themselves under the leadership of elders in a local church setting. And this certainly comes into all the anxieties we have, but there's particular anxieties that Peter has in mind as we look at the verses up above. And then there's a particular kind of humbling in which we're casting these anxieties on the Lord. We're handing them to him, and we're asking him to work on our behalf. And then this second adverbial participle, seeking. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. This is not a show. We have an enemy who's actively and hungrily seeking the destruction of people. and of the church. So that's an example of the how the devil is prowling, not in a passive, not in a show-off kind of way. He's not just trying to scare people, he's trying to destroy them. And this last adverbial participle right here is knowing how to resist, how to stand firm in our faith, knowing that we are part of a fellowship of sharing in the suffering, and that this fellowship is global, right? It's made up of all of those who share in the sufferings of Christ, right? And he is our head sufferer in chief. And in our suffering, we find fellowship with one another. We find fellowship with him. And this is helpful to remember that I'm not the only one. I'm not alone. I'm not the first. I won't be the last, right? But we're in this together, and we're part of this fellowship of sharing suffering, which is what Peter is trying to remind us about here. And so that's how I would arc 1 Peter 5, 6 through 9, with a particular focus on the relationship of action and manner.